Once again, it's the G spot where we have great support, great purpose, great opportunity, and great transformation. I want to talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I do think that are important tonight. Is the idea of um, well, submission. I want to talk about today. Submission is a quality of a highly or high value woman. The other thing is this whole notion of submission has been taken out of context, which is one of the reasons I think a lot of women have issues with it. Um, but we're going to get to that. Submission as a quality of a high valued woman. That's a term that I find to be very troublesome in that, there a high, a high valued woman because a woman is high valued and high valued is a woman in this context. For men, they look for submission, and for women, they look for financial stability. And so those two qualities seem to be the most important to a lot of people. Um, and as a result of that, uh, the idea of submission for a man needs to be looked at in light of the true nature of what it is and understanding what this quality really encompasses. Because what we've been looking for is not what true submission is. True submission has nothing to do with being the boss or doing what I say, when not the essence of it. But what we've learned in our society, in this Western culture, what we've learned in organized religion, is that this whole idea of submission has been one that has been examined and purported from a misogynistic perspective in our culture, in our churches, in our religious edifices, in our denominations, in our religious organizations. Religion has bound the woman with misogynistic ideas and subservient attitudes. So it becomes imperative for us to understand that submission isn't what we've been taught. It's not what we've been channeling into and holding on to. And that's what I want to talk about, submission in the biblical sense, because it's not submission, it's male chauvinism. It's to imprison women who have a great deal to offer each and every one of us. So let's look at submission, what it means to submit. I think the first thing that I want to do is I want to ask you guys to help me out with subscribing to the channel. I need your help. I'm asking for your support and subscribing and liking um, our channel. Um, it's one of those things that we have. We're learning how to to function in this space because it is different. So everything is not where it needs to be, and the quality is probably not where I would like to see it. Or time, there's a lot of things that I would like to see done differently, and I'm sure that as we continue to grow, that those things will take place. But it just goes to show that it takes time, and I've heard people say that in this space of YouTube that it takes time to learn and to understand. And we haven't been at this very long. Um, but we're going to continue. So we need your help to continue to grow. And so I'm asking if you would help us by subscribe to our channel. That would be very, very, very helpful. Submission. Submission is a real issue in culture and society, especially in the Western culture, the Western society that we live in here in America. We are finding that submission is becoming a greater and greater issue because there are people to the right and there are people to the left, and I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so I'm hoping that we can help people come to that space in the middle. Again, when I think that everyone, wherever it is that you subscribe to, live by, or principled by, I think you have to have some place where you get that from. Where do you get that idea for that principle? Where did it come from? Where is its foundation? I think that's important because if we don't have a notion of where that foundation came from, we really don't have a firm foundation to believe what it is that we believe. So where is it? Where did that come from? That particular paradigm, that particular idea that you believe and that you hold as being true and truth and right. Where did that come from? Where did you get it? And why did you get it from wherever it is? What is it about that causes you to feel the way that you do, or come to the arrival of that particular decision relative to that particular thing? I think a lot of times what we do is we pick up things that we've heard from other people. We're taught from schools to religions to parents to um, uh, education to society to culture to work to you name it. So we have all these pressures, all these points of view, all these ideas and the ideologies coming in upon us on a daily basis. And so we sometimes pick up things without even really thinking about how true they are, how accurate they are, how fair they are. I believe that the universe is fair. I believe the universe is equal. Um, and I think that we have been uh, given um, we have been given the opportunity to um, rethink some things and to re-experience some things. And I think we should attempt to um, do that and experience things differently. Because if we look at the way that things are in the dynamic in which we live, some things aren't working. So it's not working for a reason. So we need to look at why it might not be working, and then begin to ascertain where can we go from this place or this point to see how we can do things differently and do things better. So I believe the whole idea of submission is one of those things. Um, Women are not going to allow themselves to be held captive anymore. And at the same token, men need to understand that the notion that has been held in the past is not a legitimate biblical one. Now, for me, everything I believe in and stand for comes from the biblical narrative. Some people hold that the biblical narrative is true, and some people don't. They don't support it, and that's fine. And that's but my question is, what do you believe? We need to hold on to something. I get all kinds of questions about the biblical narrative, whether it's true, false. If it's written by white men to keep everyone in subjugation to them, which doesn't make sense because if that was the case, it seemed like Jesus would have been a Scandinavian instead of a person from a dark continent. So, but there's other things. So we're not going to even go there. But we want to talk about the idea of submission and what it is that in this culture, in Western culture, we look at submission strictly from a gender perspective and a power perspective. And what we try to do is we try to use submission as a means to keep the misogynistic idea. And they want to keep women subjugated. And women have now come to the place that they don't want to subject, or they don't want to submit. They don't want to submit to men, or they don't want to submit to men that are not um, worthy of being submitted to. And so it becomes a fight. And I am going to show how long it's been a fight in a minute. Um, Again, I use the biblical narrative as my foundational source. I am not a religious person. I'm not a religious person. Um, I believe that the biblical narrative is not a religious book. I don't believe it's a religious book. I believe that the biblical narrative is a manual for living. And by saying a manual for living, what I mean by that is, if you have breath in your body, then the biblical narrative is here for you, and can be useful to you as a human being, and not strictly because of a denominational or religious connection or affiliation. So I use the biblical narrative, but I don't use it from a religious perspective, because I am not religious. Ideologies that need to be addressed. Here's one: submission uh, has not been fair. It has not been uh, just, um, because justice is important. If you are a high valued man, I believe that justice is something that should be important. Not only is the whole notion of submission as we know it unjust, um, is captive. It holds people captives, and denies liberty to women who hold um, very important and necessary elements to the freedom, the liberty, and the dominion that we have, or are supposed to have in this dimension called Earth. So when we start talking about submission, I want to talk about it from a biblical perspective, and that's where I'm coming from. Now, for this is not a Bible study. This is a study of a principle, and when you study principles, what you have to do is you have to find um, examples of how those truths can be expounded upon, whether here in today's culture, or what I try to do is I try to go back um, through the biblical text to find, um, I believe, important ideas relative to a specific idea or concept. In this particular example, we're talking about submission. So, submission. Why is it important? What is it? What are the benefits and the what are some of the liabilities of it? We've experienced serious liabilities, and you know what they are. There's there are people that are ending relationships over the issue of submission. There are marriages ending. There are relationships that can't go further because of a diametrically opposed view of what submission is. Um, um, the refusal of the misogynistic perspective on submission, and then on the flip side, the anarchical um, perspective of submission or the refusal of submission by women. So it's causing problems in culture. And as a result, families, relationships, in every aspect of relationship. There, when we say relationship, we're not just talking about marriage. We're talking about business. We're talking about societal, cultural, um, employment. I mean, every kind of relationship. These things, the whole idea of submission comes into play, and as a result, it's gotten very contentious on both sides. So um, we need to gain a better grasp of the idea of what submission is. So let's talk about submission. What is it? Well, first thing I want to say about submission, it comes in the biblical narrative. It comes from a word called is kahas, kahas, and it is a verb. And this word kahas finds its original usage early in the biblical narrative, very early in the biblical narrative, and as a result of that being very used very early in the biblical narrative, um, there is um, what I think the first mention of it um, happened around a very unsuspecting situation. For instance, there's a record of uh, Abram. He had a wife, and his wife's name was Sarah. Sarah was um, she was barren. She couldn't have children, and because she couldn't have children, she gave her handmaiden, who was basically her servant, her maid, gave her maid to her husband to have a child. Well, the handmaiden became pregnant. Her name was Hagar, and Hagar became a target of Sarah. Um, Sarah became jealous, envious, um, catty toward Hagar, to the point that the mistreatment of Hagar drove Hagar to leave. She was going to leave. She was going to run away. And to run away, she um, worked out a plan and was on her way and set up on and in the midst of running away, sat under a tree and while she was there, a messenger came, and the messenger said to her that you need to go back and submit to Sarah, to submit to her, mean to lay down in word, deed, everything, and submit to her. So the first idea of submission was not an idea uh, that was uh, male and female. It was first female on female. Why is that important? Well, it goes to show that the original idea of submission has nothing to do with gender. That's important to understand and to remember. The first occurrence of submission happened to be relative to two women, and not how we are experiencing it now. And that's because submission is not about gender. We're going to talk about it. So when we talk about um, submission in in the biblical narrative, there is an Old Testament narrative and a New Testament narrative. Um, I'm more in line with first the New Testament as a primary source and the Old Testament as a secondary source. But in truth, they do go together. But see, what we have to understand is that when we look at the biblical narrative, one thing that we have to do is we have to understand that it is not what we've been taught. We look at the biblical narrative from a Westerner mentality. We look at it from an English language perspective, and it's neither. It's neither. So we have to change. And what we've tried to do is to take an Eastern culture and an Eastern idea and place it and force feed it into our Western culture and Western ideas and our Western mentality. And as a result, it's caused problems. And it most certainly will. And it has with this whole issue of submission. Now, when we look at, because we're looking at the old narrative or the Old Testament narrative, and we're looking at the New Testament narrative. For me, I go to the New Testament narrative to examine it as my primary source because it's more in tune with where we are now. However, the Old Testament brings the original from the basis of how it was meant to be. It's important. Okay. Now, when we look at the whole idea of submission from a New Testament perspective, um, for me, the the most important character, person, individual in the New Testament is Jesus. For me, for other people, it may be other things, but for me, it's Jesus. Why? Because Jesus, to me, is the self-actualization of humanity. It is the high. He's the highest form of what we are supposed to be, mentally, cognitively, uh, uh, physically, in every aspect, spirit, soul, body. He is the epitome of it. He is what is called the chief cornerstone. He is the measuring stone of every stone in the building. So that's who we have to measure up to. So what when we start talking about submission or how to submit, we have to go and look at what he has to say about it. I think, and so I tell people all the time that we need to focus on the red letters. Why? The red letters are the letters are the words that he spoke. So it becomes critically important to see what he has to say about certain things. And so let's examine this thing. Submission. The word submission, um, in the New Testament was never used by Jesus. That's important. That's amazing. Or is it? Why did he not address it? Didn't he know that we would have problems with submission? I mean, didn't he know? I mean, he's the self-actualized, so he should confidently know that we would have issues around the whole idea of submission. Why didn't he address it? Or did he? And if he did, he didn't address it in a way that clarifies it for us because we're still having issues with it. The idea of submission. So why didn't he mention it? I think he mentioned it, but not the way that we look for it to be mentioned. He didn't look at submission from a gender perspective. That's why you don't see him mentioning it at all, because submission has nothing to do with gender. It really has nothing to do with gender, but we've made it that. Religion has made it that. Misogyny has made it that. And as a result of that, we fail to realize that what is really talked about, that Jesus really talks about, is the whole idea is that submission is an idea or an issue of gender, but it's an issue of truth. Truth. Jesus said that truth. He spoke about truth over and over and over and over and over. That's because he was truth, right? So why did he speak about truth? Because truth is the most important relative to submission, to the idea of submission. So Jesus understood the importance of truth, and truth was never an issue. It was a given. It was a given that we live by truth, for the truth shall set us free. But what we've done is not looked at the truth. We have looked at ideas. We have at philosophical views. We've taken on all these different perspectives, but we haven't really looked at it from the Bible. But so Jesus looked at the idea of truth. Now, a lot of people say, well, Paul. Let's talk about Paul. Paul was the one who really gave us more of a understanding of what submission was. Why? Because he was like us today. Paul was dealing with the whole issue of the male female idea of what true submission was. There was issues, and Paul was dealing with it back then, and we are still dealing with it today. Still dealing with it around submission. Will we ever get past it? I think some people will and some won't. Um, Now, when we talk about submitting, here's what Jesus understood about it. Even though it's written in one of the epistles, I believe that this is the idea that he had about it. He said in the book of James, it talks about submit yourself one to another. See, so that's an important idea. So how do you submit to one another? Well, you submit to one another not by gender nor by position, but you submit to one another by truth. So the submission isn't to gender. The submission isn't to I'm the husband, you're the wife. Submission isn't based on I've submitted to you and you continue to make bad decisions, so I'm not submitting anymore. It's not any of that. James says submit one to another. And then it also goes on to say, it says, submit yourself therefore to God, resist. Okay. So the whole idea is you have to submit yourself, or submission is to the truth. It's not to the idea of a person, because submission isn't a person. It's not a gender. Submission is to an idea, to a thought, which is truth. So we submit ourselves to God, who is truth. The Creator is truth. Resist the devil. What are we talking about when we resist? We resist our rights, our position, our gender, our preconceived notions of what submission is. Resist those ideas and they'll flee. But first you must submit to the truth. See, once you submit to the truth, everything else becomes unimportant. So in our relationships, how do we deal with this idea of submission? Well, as a couple, what you have to do is you have to learn to submit to truth, not to, I'm the man in the house. That's not it, guys. It doesn't matter that you're the husband. You're the head of the household. That has nothing to do with it. Here's why the whole idea of being the man of the house, what it really means. In the Old Testament, even today in some cultures, the wife is known as the wife of whoever the husband's name is. And today, in the Western culture, the wife takes upon the last name of the husband. Become less and less of that now. More women are hyphenating their names, or they're keeping their 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 parents' name. Um, so, but here's why it was important to be identified as the wife of. It wasn't in a demeaning fashion. It wasn't in a derogatory way. What it meant is that those, let's say her name's Betty. Betty's the wife of Jesse. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that Jesse is responsible and accountable for her. In other words, he has to take care. He has to do whatever it needs to be to maintain and to demonstrate the responsibility and accountability as a husband to her. So that's important. But where we are now, because men have not done that, women have taken up the banner of being accountable and being responsible for themselves. And so, because of that, we have issues. We have serious issues, relationship issues around how we are to to operate now. So we're to submit. We submit to the truth, but we have to resist. Now, how do we resist these ideas, these things that come against us culturally, that come as a result of education or media or all these? How do we resist? Well, the word resist actually comes from a Greek word where we get the word antihistamine, athesiomai. Athesiomai is the Greek word, and we get the word antihistamine from it. Well, antihistamine comes to block, right? To block the effects of allergies. See, these things that we are exposed to that concerning submission or is actually allergies, and we need to take antihistamine to alleviate the effects of the allergy. So when we start talking about the whole antihistamine, what does antihistamines do? Antihistamines affect the way we see, hear, smell, taste. Antihistamines affect all those things, so it kind of changes our perspective. And how often do you need an antihistamine? When you start suffering the effects of the allergy. So, but what is that? What is the antihistamine? The truth is the antihistamine. There's antihistamine in the truth that you take. So when we, as a couple, decide we're trying to determine what's the right way for us to go, then we have to look at the truth. And the truth is what is going to best benefit our family. And that's neither gender, but it is the antihistamine that would block and alleviate the symptoms of the allergy, the 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 the, the influx of cultural ideology, saying that you don't have to listen to him. Who's he? He's nobody. Or that perspective that says that Women don't want to submit to nobody. I mean, all these these different allergies that are coming at us, and those allergies have to be alleviated. And so that's what it is. Submission is not an issue of doing what somebody says because of their title or their position. What it is for us to humble ourselves, not to a person. But we've got to humble ourselves to the truth. What's the best way of operating and functioning and moving forward? What is the best way? That is the truth. And the truth will set us free. But the thing is, what we want to do is we want to run things our own way. And that's the problem. That's the problem. So the idea of submission needs to be reevaluated. An idea. Truth is an idea. Truth is the right idea or the righteous idea for a given situation at a given time. And as we seek out truth, what we'll find out about truth is that truth has a sound, which is why it's important for us to learn to hear, not listen. There's a difference between listening and hearing. You're going to hear me saying these things over and over again because, faith comes by hearing and hearing and hearing and hearing. See, hearing at one time is not going to do it. We have to continually hear. It's important to understand that Jesus never said, "He that have an ear, let him listen." But he that have an ear, let him hear. It's important to hear because hearing is different. Listening is biological. The ear, the earlobe, the eardrum, all these, the apparatus within the ear. But hearing goes beyond listening to the place of understanding, not only understanding, but comprehending and developing. It goes to a whole nother realm, and it brings in the whole spirit, soul, body of an individual. It does. So hearing becomes very, very critical. We don't hear, and see what we do. So many people, they listen for you to stop talking so that they can talk. They're not even listening. They're not hearing you. They're listening. Just wait for you to stop. So for those people, you don't even cast your pearls before. You don't, because the bottom line is they're not hearing. And the thing is about hearing is this. This is one of the things I've learned about hearing. When you hear, you don't have to ask questions because in true hearing, there comes understanding. Remember, I just said understanding, comprehension. When there's comprehension and understanding, you don't have questions. So that when a person has questions, they really don't hear. So it becomes increasingly important that we learn how to hear. We need to talk about that. How do you hear? How do you hear? What is it that you're hearing? So many times I listen to many of the people that are on the different platforms, and I notice is that people don't hear each other. They really don't. So how can you submit when you can't hear? You can't. How can you? How can we? How can we really say that we submit when we can't even hear? We want to argue. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to the point that you can't even hold conversation. It's amazing. You can't even hold conversation with people because they are so caught up in their own stuff that they can't hear truth. G. Alpha Palmer. Peace.